The wooden wagon wheels groaned against the ground, vibrating with every rotation until the team finally broke through the tree line. Maria, Sana, Dona, Sheila, and Tina gripped the sides of the cart as the landscape shifted. The horizon erupted in color. Spires shaped like towering banana splits and waffle cones stretched toward the sky, glowing with a pulsing neon light that defied the natural world. They rolled past the outer perimeter, the air thickening with the scent of sugar and static. At the palace gates, the wagon jolted to a halt. Queen Banana stood waiting, her crown dripping with golden syrup that caught the artificial light. She did not wait for them to dismount. She unrolled a heavy parchment scroll, the paper crackling in the silence. She pointed a finger toward the dark, tangled mass of the whispering forest. "A gemstone of pure energy lies within the shadow dungeon," she commanded, her voice cutting through the hum of the spires. "Retrieve it, or the kingdom falls." The group turned their gaze toward the forest, the neon glow of the palace fading behind them as they prepared to step into the unknown. The canopy above the whispering forest blocked out the neon sky, replacing it with a thick, suffocating gloom. Maria led the way, but the path vanished within meters. Cotton candy vines, dense and sticky, stretched across the trail like thick, fibrous webs. Every step required a deliberate pull, the vines clinging to their boots. Sona and Dona hacked at the growth, but the material simply stretched and snapped back, closing the gap behind them. The forest did not just obstruct, it felt alive. Sheila stumbled as a vine coiled around her ankle, dragging her toward the undergrowth. Tina reached out, grabbing her arm and bracing against a tree trunk. The air grew cold, smelling of ozone and damp earth. They pushed forward for an hour, the light fading until the only thing visible was the path they hacked. Suddenly, the trees pulled back, revealing a jagged cave mouth carved into the hillside. It was not dark inside. A rhythmic violet light pulsed from the depths, casting long, erratic shadows that danced against the stone walls. The shadow dungeon had revealed itself. The group stood at the threshold, the hum of the violet energy vibrating against their chests, signaling the end of the trek and the start of the descent. They stepped into the violet glare, the air instantly turning frigid. Before they could adjust, the shadows detached from the cave walls. They were not solid, but they hit with the weight of wet stone. Maria swung her blade, the steel whistling as it sliced through a formless mass, only for another to lunge from the darkness. Sana and Dona formed a tight perimeter, their weapons striking in rhythm to keep the encroaching shapes at bay. The cave floor slicked with a dark, oily residue as the shadow mobs disintegrated under their assault. Sheila and Tina moved to the center, covering the flanks while the others pushed forward. The combat was relentless. Every time a shadow fell, two more surged from the crevices. They fought for hours, lungs burning, muscles screaming with the strain of constant motion. Finally, the last shadow dissolved into a thin mist. In the center of the chamber, atop a pedestal of jagged obsidian, the gemstone pulsed with a steady, hypnotic light. Maria approached, her hand trembling. She gripped the stone. It felt warm, vibrating against her palm with a hum that echoed through the cavern. They turned toward the exit. The group stepped out of the dungeon, but the kingdom was not as they left it. The air had turned biting, a frost settling over the cobblestones. Before they could reach the palace gates, a figure darted from behind a stone pillar. A villager, his face gaunt and eyes wide, lunged directly at Maria. He did not speak. He slammed his hands onto the gemstone, his fingers locking around the pulsing surface. The reaction was instantaneous. A high-pitched whine tore through the air, followed by a violent discharge of electricity that threw the group backward. The villager did not let go. Instead, his skin began to crack and shift. The flesh hardened, turning into jagged, blood-red crystal plates that expanded rapidly across his limbs. He groaned, a sound that deepened into a guttural roar as his frame surged in size. His back arched, his shoulders broadened, and his height doubled within seconds. The onlookers scrambled away, their boots scraping against the frozen ground as they realized the danger. The villager was gone, replaced by a towering, hulking beast. It flexed its massive hands, the sound of grinding stone echoing against the palace walls. The group stood frozen, weapons drawn but useless. The gemstone was now the catalyst for a nightmare. The beast let out a roar that vibrated through the very foundation of the kingdom. Cream moved first, palms thrust forward to unleash concentrated beams of freezing vanilla ice. The frost coated the creature's legs, turning the ground beneath it into a slick, treacherous sheet of white. The beast stumbled, its massive weight causing the ice to crack under the pressure. Seeing the opening, Berry lunged, her blade whistling through the air. As she struck at the creature's armored joints, the metal sparked against the blood-red crystal, leaving only shallow white scratches. Valera followed, leveling her revolver to fire a barrage of hardened cocoa rounds. Each shot hit with the force of a hammer, yet the projectiles shattered into dust upon contact with the beast's hide. The creature barely flinched. It shook off the ice, the crystal plates on its back grinding together. The heroes retreated a few paces, their weapons held ready, but the lack of progress was palpable. The beast stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, ignoring the freezing mist still swirling around its ankles. It swung a massive arm, forcing the group to scatter. They were hitting it with everything, yet it remained untouched. Vamp shouted over the roar of the beast, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need more power! Fall back and form the circle!" The group hesitated, watching the beast raise a massive fist, but the urgency in her command forced them to move. They dropped their weapons, leaving blades and revolvers scattered across the frozen ground. Vamp began the incantation, her hands weaving complex patterns. A low hum emanated from the cobblestones, rising in pitch until it became a piercing vibration. Fern, Sager, Berry, and Cream sprinted toward the center. As they stepped into the circle, a blinding, white-hot light erupted from the ground, engulfing them entirely. The light was so intense it forced the beast to shield its eyes, stumbling back a step. Inside the brilliance, the heroes felt the pull. Their physical boundaries began to soften, their movements losing individual definition. They reached out, fingers locking together. The light pulsed, expanding outward, as the four figures merged into a singular, towering silhouette that began to solidify. The blinding light collapsed inward, leaving a singular, towering figure standing in the center of the plaza. The warrior did not hesitate. It took a single step, the ground cracking under the sheer force of its weight, and lunged toward the beast. The creature swung its massive arm, but the warrior ducked beneath the blow with fluid, unnatural speed. He drove a shoulder into the beast's midsection, sending the monster skidding backward across the frozen square. The beast roared, trying to regain its footing, but the warrior was already moving again. It unleashed a flurry of strikes, each impact echoing like a thunderclap against the crystal plates. The warrior's fists connected with the beast's chest, leaving deep, jagged indentations. The monster tried to lash out, but the warrior caught its wrist, twisting the limb with enough force to make the crystal grind and groan. With a final, explosive surge of energy, the warrior delivered a heavy, downward strike to the beast's shoulder. A web of fractures appeared instantly. The warrior planted its feet, drawing power from the very foundation of the plaza. It pulled back a fist, the air around its knuckles distorting with raw, concentrated force. The beast sensed the end. It lunged forward with a final, frantic roar, trying to crush the warrior before the strike landed. The warrior didn't flinch. It stepped into the beast's guard, pivoting its hips to channel every ounce of momentum into a single, devastating punch. The impact point glowed white before the crystal plates disintegrated into a cloud of fine, red dust. The beast's momentum vanished instantly. It stood frozen for a heartbeat, its massive frame trembling as the remaining crystal shell crumbled away, falling in a rain of jagged shards. The creature collapsed, its form dissolving into nothing more than a pile of inert, gray powder. On the cobblestones, silence rushed back into the square, heavy and sudden. The warrior stood over the remains, its chest heaving, before it reached down to retrieve the glowing gemstone from the debris. It turned toward the palace gates, where Queen Banana waited. With a steady motion, the warrior extended its hand, offering the stone back to the ruler. Queen Banana moved toward the central fountain, her footsteps echoing against the cold stone. She held the gemstone aloft, its pulses of light rhythmic and steady. She reached the basin, where the water had long since frozen into a jagged, unmoving sculpture. She pressed the stone into the center pedestal. It did not fit at first. She pushed harder, her palms flat against the surface, forcing the stone into the slot until the mechanism clicked with a sound like cracking ice. A low vibration traveled through the ground, rattling the nearby structures. Then, the fountain erupted. A surge of white energy shot upward, spiraling into the sky and widening into a massive, translucent dome. The air temperature plummeted. A wall of wind and snow began to churn, expanding rapidly from the fountain toward the kingdom's perimeter. It swept over the streets, burying the remnants of the battle under a layer of frost. Outside the walls, the approaching hostile creatures reached the edge of the barrier. They lunged, but the wall of ice repelled them instantly, throwing them back into the darkness. The barrier stabilized, a shimmering, impenetrable shell of white. Inside, the wind died down to a whisper. The kingdom fell into a profound, heavy silence. The mission was complete, and the kingdom stood protected in the quiet, biting cold.